I now know why Victoria found Mike Kaye, who covers the Panthers for the Charlotte Observer. I now know why they have connected, because Mike has almost as many underscores in his Twitter handle as Victoria does. At Mike_E_K on Twitter, covers the Panthers for the Observer. First of all, thank you very much for your time. With the draft in our rearview mirror, everybody should be ready to take at least some time away. So hope I'm not disturbing you. But let's start with the wide receiver edition, and there are two, only one of which was a draft pick. So your quick reaction to the drafting of Arizona wide receiver Tet McMillan.
Yeah, T-Mac was an interesting case. I was never somebody who bought into the Jalen Walker, the Panthers hype, just because he seemed to go against the typecasting that Ejiro Evero kind of uses at pass rusher. I'm sure we'll talk about those guys in a minute, but from the standpoint of McMillan, wide receiver was clearly a need. This was not a top-heavy – this was not a very heavy wide receiver class as far as talent. And I think they just decided, look, wide receiver bottoms out here. Pass rusher doesn't bottom out for a while.
Right.
Go up and get your guy who can make some plays in the passing game. Give Bryce Young another big target. Xavier Legette's probably better off as a number 2 option to begin with. And so here's a guy who has an incredible catch radius, can grab the ball out of the air. He's not the fastest wide receiver, but he can win jump balls in a vertical passing game.
Mike Kaye is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. My curiosity with this whole thing, and I understand the criticism because he doesn't have the high-end speed and all of that, and when you pick a guy 8th in the draft, you think that he's the total package in terms of the wide receiver position. But I in the back of my mind, I kept hearing how at a certain number, and who knows when that number was, the draft was pretty flat all the way through, say, the end of the first round. So the same guy you picked at number 8, you could have gotten at number, 20 or 28. But if nobody was going to trade up, you simply had to decide who's our guy, wherever we would take him, and just take him. Is that the way you read what the Panthers did?
Yeah, I think no matter what, there was going to be a sect of the fan base that was like, huh? I think with Walker being a hybrid player, not being a natural fit for outside linebacker based on body type and length, I think Mason Graham, the same thing. He has incredible tape, but, very small arms, not necessarily the most fit of guys naturally. And so I think there would have been concern there. But when you look at McMillan, his superpower is catch radius and dependable hands, and that seems like a direct correlation to the struggles that Xavier Legette had as a rookie. So you add those guys up, you see the success that the Eagles and the Bengals have had with two well-paid or highly invested in wide receivers, and you try to go from there. This offense was 29th ranked last year. As bad as the defense was, the offense wasn't much better.
Right.
And I think you want to put your quarterback in the best position possible, and when push comes to shove, if you're taking guys all things equal, well, you also have to study the rest of the draft. And, wide receiver, I really liked Matthew Golden, but outside of him, it just kind of felt like there wasn't a guy worthy of rushing that card up for other than McMillan, and I think that's what they ultimately determined.
Mike Kaye covers the Panthers for the Observer in Charlotte, is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. Now let's go after the draft, and this went under the radar everywhere, and I actually saw it, and I wasn't sure if I was getting a prank call or a prank post from somebody in the Atlanta Falcons organization. Hunter Renfrow is back, and he's now back in the area where he first made, I guess, headlines at Clemson. How did this come together? What do you think of it?
Well, he came for a visit earlier in the offseason, and a lot of us just kind of chucked that up to, like, oh, it's a favor. Oh, he's trying to. But no, I guess he impressed during that visit. He's 29 years old. He took a year off. last year. I didn't think his last two seasons in Las Vegas were particularly promising. But if you remember that 21 season, he was on fire as a slot receiver. And so I think the Panthers are very serious about, building up competition. But I think even more importantly, I think they're trying to be creative in how they create that competition, right? Like they double dip at pass rusher to improve that group. They made some really peculiar but yet interesting trades that were pretty creative. They've added guys like Patrick Jones who can rush in a few different ways. Same with Bobby Brown. Cam Jackson, the 5th-round pick, be a movable guy who's a mammoth man. So I think, they've got a plan, they've got a structure, but even more importantly, they're thinking outside the box.
I mean, I dig it. Look, if he's one of those guys that I'm not going to say speed doesn't matter because speed will always matter. But he is one of those receivers. We just go back to the play he made at Clemson, right? Didn't he catch the national championship touchdown pass?
I believe so.
Yeah.
But
with all of their receivers, it was him who caught the touchdown pass.
But like you, my memory is a little shaky after covering the Carolina Panthers for a while. So I want to say you're correct, but
it's all right. It doesn't matter.
If you snopes me on that one and I'm incorrect, sure.
All right, let me move on because you alluded to drafting 2 edge rushers, one in the 2nd round, another in the 3rd round. Is this – I mean, there's 2 ways to look at it. One, they think that both players are good and they're building for the future and they expect both to be great. Or, you know what? We're not really sure. It's a roll of the dice either way, and at least maybe one of them will hit. How do you look at it?
Well, they're 2 very different pass rushers. If you look at their size, length, weight, everything, they're very different. Nick Swarton really fits what Evero wants to do. He wants heavy-handed, big, long, lengthy guys. He's 6'3" and has 34-inch arms. He started the college season at 285 and dropped to 275 by the end of it, and by the combine, he was at 257.
Wow.
So he has undergone this body transformation. Oh, and by the way, he can't legally purchase alcohol until August.
Nice.
So there's so much upside here, and he was so good at Purdue before he transferred to Texas A&M. Really good burst, really good hands. He's got a spin move that is tremendous for a guy who's so young. He's got a lot of power. He's a guy who can stop the run first and foremost, but I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised when you see out of him as an edge rusher. And then Princely Uman Milan was a guy I actually mocked to them in a day 2 mock draft after the 1st round. I just love his length. He's 6'4", 244, so he's svelte, but he is a guy who can bend. He's like Gumby. He's a guy who can get around the edge with speed. He's got some understated power. I think he'll be a guy who at 23 can play right away. I actually think he might play a little bit more than Nick Swarton initially because he is excuse me.
You're right.
He is somebody who can win with speed and not necessarily technique. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Josh Sweat, who was obviously a big free agent addition for the Arizona Cardinals. He's a guy that I think can develop. I think, he's played in 2 different systems at Florida and Ole Miss and had success in both of them. He's going to be a guy on 3rd down who you could view as like a closer, like a guy who, if you need a sack or you need a momentum push, he's a guy who can get in the backfield, whether that's as a pass rusher or a run stopper. And I think they should be really excited about both guys.
I also appreciate you working in the word svelte during this conversation. Mike Kaye covers the Panthers for the Charlotte Observer. I want to jump to the 4th round and Lathan Ransom, who to me stood out at Ohio State because every time I watched the Buckeyes, I came away with, that guy's nuts. And at the very least, They've got a special teams guy there, I believe, but I mean, he just hits everything.
Yeah, he's a seek and destroy missile for sure. His strengths actually are pretty comparable to Trevon Merrick's, who was obviously their big free agent signing. I think the way you could look at this is if they play three safeties in coverage, Merrick will probably play the dime linebacker, the nickel linebacker, and Ransom will play probably closer to the box, and they'll just need a guy like Monty Richardson to kind of play post. Or if they bring in somebody like Julian Blackman or Marcus Williams, who visited in March, maybe that's where they fit in. But I think, Ransom more than anything fits the temperament and kind of the toughness that they want to bring to this roster, especially at safety, where last year they only had one NFL caliber starting safety in Xavier Woods. He's now in Tennessee. A lot of the issues with the run defense came from that last line of defense just being awful.
Sure.
And so they've reached this safety room, and I think Ransom's a good tackler. He can blitz. He forced 6 forced fumbles in 5 years. That's really good production, especially from a box safety. And I think at worst, they have a situation where Ransom can provide, insurance to their big free agent signing, but I also think they can use him creatively around the secondary, maybe even at nickel. So we'll see where that goes, but it wouldn't shock me if they add another guy to the mix in the coming days.
All right, final question. A position group you think still needs addressing. Look, they were last in the league in almost everything on defense, so there's always going to be room for improvement. But where would you expect them to try to address, either in late free agency, undrafted free agency, and things like that?
Well, safety, as they just brought up, and that'd be kind of a boring answer. I'd say corner. They invested heavily in J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson, but J.C. Horn has that obvious history of injuries, and Mike Jackson's trying to prove he's not a one-year wonder.
Right. After
becoming a first-year starter here. They like Shaw Smith-Wade, but he's still learning the nickel position. And beyond that, they have, a failed Vikings draft pick in Caleb Evans, and then Shamar Bartholomew, who they claimed off waivers after training camp last year. So the position's pretty thin, both on bodies and talent, and it would not shock me if they went bargain hunting in free agency or waited to see what teams do post-draft with their roster reductions, because they have to make room for other guys and undrafted free agents.
Mike Kaye, at Mike_E_K with an E on the end of it. I appreciate your time. Charlotte Observer covers the Panthers. Thank you very much, and we will chat soon.
Thanks for having me, as always.
For those guys who have been covering the draft, who have been who have a team beat, not just guys. I use guys as kind of a collective, men and women. The last month, 2 months, 3 months have to have been ridiculous. And all you need to know about the importance of this, in terms of the coverage, I'm not talking about that it's like splitting the atom or anything like that. But people consume draft coverage so extensively that you almost have to continuously, even if there's no real news, you have to feed that beast over and over and over again. These people must be sick and tired of it by now.